In our fast-paced world, it's easy to get swept up in the currents that surround us. But we are the authors of our own life story, and we are infinitely capable of creating the change we want to see within us and beyond. Welcome to Shaping Freedom, a show where we explore and share practical ways to cultivate extraordinary life experiences. I'm your host, Lisanne Basquiat. I'm a teacher, entrepreneur, and life strategist. After a career as a corporate executive, I embarked on my own path of entrepreneurship and focused on the human and spirit connection. I come from generations of trailblazing entrepreneurs, artists, healers, and champions of human dignity. In this episode, we'll be asking the question, can redefining sobriety and redefining motherhood help us reclaim our power and find freedom in our choices? To help us explore this question, we have a very special guest, Ruby Warrington. She's a thought leader, an author, and the founder of The Numinous. Ruby will be sharing her insights on how sobriety and the motherhood movement can be tools for personal growth, spiritual awakening, and finding freedom in our choices. We'll also be discussing her latest book, Women Without Kids, The Emergence of the Motherhood Movement Redefined, and how it can help women without kids reclaim their power and find freedom in their choices. So sit back, relax, and tune in as we explore the intersections of sobriety, spirituality, motherhood, and freedom with Ruby Warrington. By the end of this episode, you'll have a deeper understanding of how these topics can help you reclaim your power and find freedom in your choices. Well, I am really excited to have this conversation with you, Ruby, for a variety of reasons.
Okay.
Yeah. And so first of all, Ruby Warrington, you are an author, and you are the leader of several movements and a community builder, and someone who also helps other people to take their ideas and transform them into words in books. A book doula, I think, is how you refer to yourself.
That is a term I use. Yes.
And so when I heard, I think Ryan reached out and asked if I'd be interested in having a conversation with you, I, perused through the information, and within, 10 seconds, my answer was just yes. And usually, I'll go into like, yes, and we can talk about this or that. And as soon as I saw your information, I was just blown away and really excited about the prospect of us having a conversation. So,
well, thanks. I'm excited to hear what sparked that. Like, yes, especially about this project, Women Without Kids. But thanks for that lovely introduction, particularly touching on the fact that, yes, I help people kind of bring their ideas forward in book form now. But I think I've always gravitated towards this mentor role, like throughout my life. My mom actually sent me a couple of pictures that she dug out the other day from my early childhood. I was like the oldest kid in the street where I grew up. And so all my friends were a bit younger. And there was in particular a couple of little girls in the street who I kind of really took under my wing. I don't know. She just sent these pictures of me with these younger kids. And I just saw myself in that role of sort of mentor and guide, which I still very much embody in my work. So, yeah.
Where did you grow up, Ruby?
I grew up in a teeny tiny village on the east coast of England in a county called Suffolk, which is very rural. It's about 2 hours outside of London to the northeast. It's on the coast. And it was a very rural upbringing. When I say tiny village, there was like one store. And I don't know what the population of the village was, but one school that had probably about 40 pupils total.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was very rural, very kind of rustic, idyllic, very outdoorsy, kind of playing in the fields, kind of an upbringing. And then when I was 8, my parents had separated when I was very young. My dad stayed in London where I was actually born. But when I was 8, we moved up to London, and I had a much more city life from then onwards.
Mm-hmm. That has to be a big difference. I would imagine
Yes.
going from as rural an environment as you were raised in your early years to going to London. I mean, that's huge. That's like night and day.
Yes. And I was so excited. Even at age 8, I was so excited to go live in the big city. It's held so much glamour and sophistication. I was just really drawn to that, even from a really young age. But looking back, I'm so grateful that my mom chose to raise my brother and I for those very early years in an environment where we had so much freedom just to roam and play outside. And there were, we didn't have all the kind of fears that come with being having young children in a city environment.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that, so welcome to Shaping Freedom, the podcast.
Thank you.
I'm just like diving right into the conversation here. Welcome to the Shaping Freedom podcast. And one of the things that is that I'm really up to and that I enjoy speaking with people who are just ordinary individuals, because most of us are when we're first born. We're extraordinary, and also, we kind of step into this world. And then there are some people who take on these extraordinary perspectives or choose the ways that they're going to show up in the world and express themselves in the world. And so that was really where the yes came from for me as I perused some information about you. And I noticed how you have these different conversations going about very interesting topics like, being sober and women without children and or without kids, and all these different topics that kind of sit on the periphery of our experience here, but that not a lot of people talk about. And so that was really where the yes came in for me about having a conversation with you, because I was really interested in knowing first a little bit about who you are, and how you, Ruby, came to want to have these kinds of conversations about these, very not talked about, not often talked about topics.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thrilled to be invited onto the show because I love the title Shaping Freedom. And I feel like that's such a guiding light for my work, although I wouldn't necessarily have identified it as that, but thinking about it in the context of this conversation and this show, I think that for whatever reason, I've always been quite comfortable with being an outsider and quite comfortable with doing things my own way, mm-hmm. versus doing things the way I should do them. Mm-hmm. Or that other people tell me I should do. And not in a rebellious way, not in a rebellious pushback way, mm-hmm. but I've just always had a real strong connection to my own intuition about what's right for me. A psychotherapist might have a field day with that and say, well, you didn't get so much guidance from your parents, and so you had to develop that early. And that's one way of looking at it. I'm also an Aries. Like, I've done a lot of work kind of helping popularize and normalize kind of astrology as a tool for self-awareness, mm-hmm. Beyond the sort of woo-woo connotations. But as an Aries too, I've just always been very sort of self-directed. And I think what I hope to offer people with my work is that same level of confidence in making choices for yourself that are right for you, which might not be right for everybody else. It's not even that they're not right for everybody else, but which might mean taking a path that diverges from the norm. To me, that path is freedom, right? Like, if I can really feel confident, and not only feel confident, but also be supported and ask for the support I need to take this path, which is my path, versus this well-worn, well-trodden path that is quote unquote the norm. That kind of feels like that's freedom. And I also appreciate that that's very sadly a privilege that not everybody has access to either, And so,
in what way is that a privilege, in your opinion?
I've been lucky enough to have education financial support from my husband at times, being raised in a family where there wasn't a lot of, you have to do it this way or we're going to kick you out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I see all of these things as privileges, which have enabled me to make my choices for myself and feel confident and not be persecuted because of those choices.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I suppose a big part of my work is about, helping people, in some cases, even acknowledge it's okay to want something that's different from the norm. It's okay to want something that's different from what my folks want for me. Mm-hmm. It's okay to want something different from what somebody who looks like me or has this kind of a body should want for themselves.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely, I do. And I think that's why I asked about the word privilege, because I hear, it's a word that we use a little more often these days than I'd heard it used in the past. And one of the things about the word privilege that I want to help people to understand is that I like for it to be used from the perspective of, okay, well, maybe I had the ability to do certain things, but I'd hate for it to be used as a way for a person to not do the things that they want to do and use it as, well, that's something like somebody has a privilege to do that. When in fact, I believe that we do have the ability to decide how we are going to live during this lifetime on this planet and make those decisions for ourselves. And that's not, in my opinion, something that's left to privilege. It's more your birthright to live a life in the way that you choose to live your life. And I don't believe that is necessarily tied to your economic status or any of that. It's more of a mindset. It's an approach to life that a person takes. And I'm not saying that you meant it that way. I just want to make sure that for those who are listening, that they don't kind of, put themselves into this. Well, that's for those folks who are, whatever their definition for privileged is.
Yes. And I'm really happy you used the word birthright. I was literally going to sort of it was almost being being vocalized in my brain as you used that word. Yes, it is our birthright to live the lives that we are here to live. And I do believe that it can be really beneficial to have role models, mentors, guides, cheerleaders, helping us get into that mindset in a world that will tell us, no, you can't do this. You're not allowed to do this. Right. So yes, it's not a privilege to be free,
right,
to live our lives.
Right.
And sometimes we need kind of some encouragement to believe that.
Absolutely. And that's kind of where, that's where community comes into play. It's funny. I've been, this whole idea of shaping freedom, right? It's about deciding like what, freedom is such a beautiful thing, because freedom really is, it doesn't necessarily mean like, turning the table over on your whole life. It means helping yourself to really connect back to who you are and to living your life in the way that you want to live your life. Because I believe that what we are able to share with the world is so much richer when we're sharing from that place of freedom, versus constriction or limitation. And I've been thinking a lot about that lately, and about how, this group of us, people who are, you use the word outsider, or the other, or people who maybe don't have a conventional approach to the way that they're living their lives. And I think that there's community there. There's community in that space, that really transcends the kind of, it's about money, or it's about where you live, or it's about being a person of color or a person not of color or whatever. It's about it. There's a mindset and there's an approach to life that certain people have that I think should be celebrated.
And finding that community,
yes,
is a huge part of, I mean, first, so where to start with this? So the subhead for my new book, Women Without Kids, is the revolutionary rise of an unsung sisterhood. And that unsung sisterhood piece was really key to me, because it really felt, as somebody who doesn't have children and who had always sort of known that that probably wasn't my path, I'd always felt like I was the only one. And thanks to that very strong and secure inner knowing that I've always had, I was able to confidently take this path. And to not feel, well, I mean, I have had throughout my life a lot of projection, a lot of questioning. Why don't you want children? Are you sure you don't? You'll probably regret it. Like, no one ever feels ready. You should just go for it. You'd be a great mom, like all of that. So yes, I'm not saying that didn't impact me, but I also, my own inner knowing sort of overrode any self-doubts that might have kind of come in as a result of that. But that said, I always felt like I was the only one, and feeling like that, I'm the only one, did beget some internalized feelings of shame. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I've missed something. Maybe, what is it? Maybe I'm damaged in some sort of irreparable way, you know? And it was only sort of reaching my early 40s that I actually looked around and realized, oh, I know quite a lot of women without kids, actually. Turns out maybe there have been more of us than I ever realized, quietly weighing the pros and cons, dealing with this kind of like intrusion and projections from outside, trying to figure out for ourselves, is this right for me? Is this not? And here we are, we're women without kids, and we have our different reasons, but we have this shared experience of not having something. Whereas there's such incredible community for mothers in all different kinds of ways and areas. But it hasn't really felt like there is a strong sense of community among women without kids. And that's one of the things that I wanted to create with this book, or help to spark or spearhead maybe, was kind of community, spaces where we could come together and discuss our experiences, discuss these very internalized and often very conflicted feelings about whether we wanted to become mothers or not. And partly through my work with Sober Curious, and a similar area where if you choose to opt out of the drinking culture, you're again immediately like the only one, the boring one at the party, the designated driver. You're not involved. You're not in the gang.
Right.
That I'd realized how hugely valuable it was to help other people who are having that experience find each other, talk to each other, and within that feel so much more confident about sticking to their path, you know, versus going with the honestly and ultimately peer pressure. You know, that perhaps one of the biggest antidotes to peer pressure is to find another peer group who share your views or will support you in your views.
And be pressured in that very positive and encouraging way.
Positive peer pressure. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think that, that's one of the things that so many people, I know for myself, I always felt like the other as a child. You know, I'm from Brooklyn. I'm a Virgo, by the way. And I was raised in Brooklyn, and I'm first generation. My father was Haitian and my mother was Puerto Rican. And I was raised when my parents split up when I was very young, I was raised by my father. You know, I lived in my father's house and had a relationship with my mother always. And was raised in a household in Brooklyn with my brother, my sister, and my dad. And it was a very different world. And I felt very, very, very alone in that. And then to add another layer of complexity, you know, my home wasn't traditional in that my father, you know, was the person that we lived with. And then we grew up in a part of Brooklyn where we went to public school, but we grew up in Boerum Hill, which was a little kind of an upper middle class area. It was a little bit different. So, and we were first generation. And so going to school in Brooklyn, I felt, you know, here I was, this, you know, a Black young person, did not have a mother at home, and I would go and visit my friends, and I couldn't find that anywhere. And then my stepmom, later on, when my dad and stepmom got together, my stepmom is English, and she's from Altrincham, actually. And so I always had this life, always, that has felt very other-ish. I don't use the word outsider anymore. I used to feel like an outsider, but I refuse. And for me, it's more like other, like I've always felt a little different from the people that I'm around. And that can be both, for me, both a blessing and painful at times, because in my own thoughts and in my own conversations, or in my conversations with smaller groups of people that understand me, that's, those are easy conversations to have. I can connect to other people who are also in an outsider or other kind of place, but it brings up different challenges, when you don't have someone who quite understand, you don't have people or a group of people that quite understand what kind of life you're living or the challenges that are coming up in your life.
I like the way you frame that as the experience of feeling other as being challenging and having its benefits. I don't know if you relate to this, but I also, similarly, my parents having separated when I was 1, and then growing up in this tiny rural village where everybody had 2 parents. And, it was very unusual to not have a dad. And they also weren't officially divorced or separate, that he would come visit sometimes. So he was kind of in and out of our life, it was, and then they had my brother. So they were still together on some level, but it wasn't really clear. So again, there was this, I can relate to that. But I sort of feel now at this age, looking back on my experiences and how my early experiences kind of shaped who I am, I feel like being the other, it sort of almost forces a deeper level of self-awareness and self-reflection than if you kind of neatly fit into all of the boxes that are who you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to be doing, because you really are forced to question, why am I the way I am?
Everything.
Everything. Exactly. It was to question everything.
Yes.
Why am I the way I am? Why are they the way they are?
Yes.
Why is this all the way this all is? So,
and a lot of it is because of the questions. A lot of it is the questions that you get, in response to these questions. Because I think that for me, I knew I was other because of my observations, but I also started to recognize that I was other because of the observations of others, who were like, well, you don't have a mother in your house, and how would you know? And you don't, you're not this,
Yeah. So yes. And, within that, then finding others is really,
yes,
it's wonderful.
It's fun.
It's really wonderful finding others. And, it's something that's been coming up. And I suppose another kind of hallmark of my work in both these most recent books has been to sort of position it different and equally valid. Different and equally valid. That's sort of becoming a bit of my mantra in terms of how to think about walking these divergent paths, equally valid, I think is really important. Yeah. Rather than just this, these very sort of prescribed ideal normals, that we're presented with in our lives in all sorts of different ways.
What do you say? And I don't know how often you encounter people who are, and I want to talk about the book in a bit. And before we get there, I wanted to really start to speak to people who are maybe still walking this path of trying to understand how to relate, if you are in this bucket, or if you are a person who is, other or outsider or divergent, or, whatever the label is for it, but someone who maybe is walking through this planet feeling different, but also, different and equally valid, different and also recognizing their own, your own validity. Like, what do you have to say, or what can we share with folks who perhaps are struggling with that and trying to figure out, like, how do you create both internal validation and also freedom within the communities that you're walking through?
It's a really hard question to answer because I think it's so unique depending on a person's situation. Are you other in your family? Are you other in your community? Are you other in your place of work? In which case there'd be different ways to maybe approach that. I guess something that came up just as you were asking the question was like, this is one of the reasons I love astrology. And you also mentioned you're a Virgo, so I'm taking it you're okay with talking about this. Some people still don't like talking about it.
I am a Virgo. I am a Leo rising. I can get on. I have a life path of 5. We can get all into it.
Okay. Let's go here for a little bit then.
Okay.
One of the reasons I love astrology is that our individual birth, every human being on the planet has an individual birth chart, which is unique to them.
That's right.
The birth chart is a sort of a map of the sky, and it shows the position of the different planets of the zodiac at the time of our birth. Every individual birth chart is different. It's unique. And just holding that awareness is such a great reminder to me that we're all different. We're all other. We're all unique, right?
Right.
We might fit into certain, variations of different boxes and be sort of like ascribed the label of normal in certain areas and not in other areas. But underneath it all, we're all completely unique in terms of our personality, in terms of the things that light us up. Of course, there are similarities. And of course, all humans at the same time, and so I'm such a fan of a both and, right? We're all completely unique. And we all humans share certain basic needs. One of the greatest basic needs that we share as human beings is the need to belong, is the need to be accepted. Because we're tribal beings too, we need to feel like we belong because we need to feel like safe. We need to feel like we're part of a tribe. If we're cast out from our tribe, then we're at risk. Our survival is at risk if you go back to the really kind of primal roots of that need. So the need to belong is one of our deepest shared human needs, which is, I think, why the experience of being othered, we can immediately feel, it can immediately push us into the fear place or the less than place. Whilst on the other side of the coin, being othered is just a reminder of our beautiful uniqueness, And so I suppose finding a way to remind ourselves that everybody is unique, and no matter what they might be broadcasting to the world with their words and actions, on the inside, they might be experiencing many of the same insecurities, fears, feelings of shame, self-doubt that we're experiencing too. And this is why I love podcasts, because I think podcasts are such a great way to kind of dig into some of those deeper inner workings in a way that feels really intimate, but that lots of people can kind of get an insight into. So yeah, I think reminding yourself that everybody is unique, everybody's different in a way. And as much as you might feel like you're being othered, that everybody experiences that to an extent,
Yeah.
But then also, that said, finding places where you do belong or feel like you have found your people and really prioritizing that, This is another reason I have a love-hate relationship with social media. But one of the things I like about it is that it is possible to find and connect with individuals or communities of people that we might never have had access to before these technologies came into being, So social media can be a great place to find like-minded people when we're feeling like nobody gets us,
Absolutely. Part of the reason why I do the work that I do through Shaping Freedom is to also help people to remember that sometimes we get so caught up in wondering about what external forces or people think about us, and we cultivate our relationship with the outside world based on how, validating people are,
Mm. Mm.
or different systems are. And I think it's really important to dig deep and figure out who you are. Like, take the time to figure out who you are. You will never regret it, because once you're clearer about who you are, you learn things like forgiveness of yourself and of others, and you learn like what your values are and what truly makes you up. It puts you in a position of building your inner confidence and acceptance, because once you accept yourself, then what you're seeking is community and tribe versus acceptance of other people.
Right.
Because when you're looking for acceptance for other people, or when you're looking to please other people, you wind up doing things like I did when I first went to college. I went to college to become an accountant. Not me. My dad was an accountant.
I can't picture that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I was like, oh, I'm going to become an accountant.
I've known you for half an hour, but I can't picture that.
I'm telling you. And I was sitting there in class and I'm like, what am I doing? This doesn't make sense. And so I stopped and I cut that short really quickly, and then went into corporate, for some of the same reasons. I went in and I built a corporate career, and a lot of it was because I wanted to prove something both to myself and to other people, that I could fit into what was acceptable, because it can be difficult to be divergent. It's not always comfortable. And then over the years, even while I was in corporate, I've always had a pretty strong sense of my identity and who I am. And so once I kind of got through and worked through, doing things for, to please my father, who was, again, an immigrant, and who was like, in this country, you do these things. And this is what success looks like in this country, for people in this country. And once I kind of got through that and got back to myself, I recognized that it really is about the work that I do within myself. And then, and only then, can I truly find the people who are my tribe.
Yes.
And who those folks are, and so that we can have that common conversation.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think it's just making me think of how many people living quote unquote normal lives are feeling trapped, feeling unfulfilled, questioning, is this my purpose? Is this all there is? Is this what life is about? I've been that person. I've pursued in my early career, a career in magazine journalism in the UK. It was this sort of glamorous, cool career path. And I really felt like it was everything I wanted. And when I was finally in my dream job, I became really depressed because I was so unfulfilled and so stressed out. And I felt really like bizarrely angry with everything all the time. And it just sort of felt like, oh no, this isn't it. But then what is it? And that was actually when I sort of got really into the study of astrology. And it was something that really helped me kind of dig into like deeper aspects of my personality and my psyche that I realized were not able to be expressed at all there, even though it looked on paper like everything I'd ever wanted, and and that society had kind of deemed cool, successful, etc. But yes, I mean, I think that the Great Resignation coming out of the pandemic just shone a light again on how many people are just feeling deeply unfulfilled with their kind of cookie cutter corporate careers, and are really looking for, when faced with a global pandemic, like, life is short. Is this it?
Right. Absolutely. And there are possibilities, because we lived within possibilities that we could never imagine. Like, no one ever thought about being at home, and that you'd have your entire life take place at home, and that you, with the people that you live with, would be sharing a space to work, for those who were working. Right. And so we created that. And I think that what that's done for a lot of people is sparked that, added a little bit of water to those seeds of like,
Mm.
when I was, this age, I wanted to be I could have been an artist or a writer or whatever those things are. I think it's really opened the doors to the possibilities for people.
Definitely. And then there come the challenges. How do I pay the bills? How do I, what are my parents going to say if I quit this and do something else or whatever it might be? Yeah.
But that's all the freedom. That's the freedom.
That's the price of freedom.
That's the privilege right there, right? And then it's also like, it doesn't have to be either or. Like I think you said, but and, right? It doesn't have to be either or. It can be, I continue this thing because it's how I sustain myself. And I'm going to dedicate some of the energy that I was spending looking out the window and imagining what my life would be like if I had done this thing. Take those things that you are starting to build regret about and put some energy into those things. And so it doesn't have to be, ditch everything else and go do this new thing. It can be integrate part of your dreams, integrate part of your soul, integrate part of what sets your soul on fire into your life, and then see where things wind up. Mm-hmm. And maybe you do it and you're like, hey, I don't want to be a writer. I don't want to sit,
Exactly. That was a great daydream, but actually there's more that I find valuable here in this secure, stable kind of job.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't writing. Right. Maybe I want to be a tap dancer. Whatever, But I think that, I really encourage people to, allow themselves to dream and to believe that freedom is possible. Let's talk about your book. Let's talk about the topic. First of all, this topic of women without kids.
I first had the idea for it in December 2019. So a fairly long process, as books generally are. Books take a while, It's a big subject. I don't think I really realized when I first decided I'm going to write about this next. I don't think I quite realized like how deep this goes. Naively, perhaps.
Yeah. I think, and I also loved, the working title that you played around with for a while. And I know myself, I would have been like, I don't know that I want to throw that word out there, but I love the word because it's yours. Own it, Yes. And I think that we as women in this world, there is so much conversation around this area of our bodies that is ours.
Yeah.
And, and so much of our agency about this area of our bodies, that belong to us, I'm talking about lady parts.
Yes. You have to read the book to see what the book working title was.
Yes. I'm not going to spill that.
That title was like, that title landed in my brain and then sort of like 5 seconds later, this is the book. This is the title. And then it was like, this is the book then. The title came first. And I think it came from that place and of just, how dare anybody have an opinion about what I am doing with my procreative potential?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. This is 1000% mine to own. And nobody else is allowed to have an opinion about this.
Absolutely.
And for so many people, they would love to be a mother, to have a child. And for whatever reason, they haven't been able to. And nobody's allowed to have an opinion about that either.
That's right.
So it came from quite a fiery place.
Yeah, haven't been able to, or maybe just did not want to.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Sorry, to clarify, my position is I never wanted to have children. And that was always one part of my otherness, a big other, as we touched on. But I, acknowledged it sort of almost in the same breath that for many people, that doesn't feel like a choice, not being able to have children, whether it's due to fertility issues or just due to life circumstances, not making it possible. It's an incredibly emotionally fraught subject, no matter where you are on the spectrum of desire or aptitude or capability for parenthood. And it's so unspoken. It's something that we don't talk about in sort of like curious and compassionate ways. There's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of prejudice. There's a lot of people have a lot of ideas about how things should be in this area, and that doesn't reflect human experience. I think even, and this is something I hear repeatedly from mothers who've engaged with the work too, like even within the experience of motherhood, there's such a spectrum of positives, negatives, challenges, opportunities, conflicted feelings, that's starting to be spoken of a little bit more, I think, but it's relatively recent that mothers have even been allowed to express dissatisfaction in the role of motherhood, or feeling challenged by the role, or even, God forbid, anything like regret about having become mothers, So these are all conversations that are really at the heart of our lives as women, regardless of whether or not we have children. And yet there's very little kind of nuanced, compassionate conversation in this area.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the moment where you decided that you were going to, like, this was a writing project that you were going to take on?
Yeah, I remember very clearly.
I remember very clearly. Who said something? Who said something to piss you off, Ruby?
It came from the seed was very inspiring. To tell the story a little bit, to give some context, I was feeling incredibly burnt out after Sober Curious. My last book had come out, and had finally managed to get a few days away, and went with my husband to the island of Vieques off the coast of Puerto Rico. And I think on like the third day we were there, we'd gone to the beach, and it was kind of raining, sunshine showers. And every time it showered, we would go under this little like hut on the beach to shelter. And there was a box of books in this hut, and they were all damp and covered in sand. And one of them was a book called The Silent Passage by a journalist named Gail Sheehy. She wrote the book Passages, which is very well known, sort of all about life transitions. But The Silent Passage, this was her book about menopause. And she frames menopause in this book as the gateway to a woman's second adulthood. And it was the first time I'd heard menopause spoken about in positive terms. And I think I was 43 or so at the time, and was sort of beginning to look ahead. The word perimenopause had been kind of popping up here and there. I'd been kind of monitoring my system and just kind of wondering, just curious, wondering, how will this be for me? And so finding her book, which I read that day, like I devoured it in the day on the beach, was so inspiring. I found myself feeling quite excited about this next phase of my life, And within that realization, realized, and I have no regrets about not being a mother. And no part of my body feels like it's going into panic mode of time's running out. Shit, you've left it too late. You've got to do it now. And I realized, no, I wasn't meant to be a mother. That was never, this has always been the right path for me. And all of that questioning I had done, and all of those opinions of other people that had rudely intruded into my life, it just felt ridiculous that this had been so expected of me and had been seen as so strange and other, when it was just obviously the right path for me. And that was when the idea came in. I want to write a book that presents non-motherhood as equally valid to motherhood, And then within that, I think I just reached a stage, having quit drinking several years before, and got a lot more clarity about the sort of root causes of any of the kind of existential like dis-ease I'd been feeling. And I was at a stage in my kind of personal development where I was ready to actually answer that question for myself. Why do you not want to be a mother? Why did you not want to have kids? Because still, as much as I'm saying this path is equally valid, and still I'm a mammal, I'm a human mammal. I have the parts, like there's a very kind of, loud and overarching theory that human beings are designed to procreate. Like that's the purpose of our species, or a large part of our purpose. Why have I not wanted to do this thing? And so I decided to, okay, I'm going to bring my journalistic mind to this, and I'm going to really dive into it, and really look at all of the reasons behind my decision. But then also zooming out, the birth rate globally has been dropping steadily, steeply for the past 100 plus years. That huge demographic shift, which will reshape how our societies look over the course of this century, how we work, how we live, what family looks like, elder care, all of these things are going to be deeply impacted. But that shift represents millions and millions and millions of individual choices and decisions on behalf of women. And so, yeah, I wanted to give any and all women and women identifying individuals the opportunity and the permission to really get clear on my why for being a woman without kids.
I think also there's this idea of, to create is not just about procreation. It's also about, what you create in the world, whatever that is. And I'm not saying that, and I think that's true of everybody, and if we're speaking about women right now, I think that's true of every woman. At the end of the day, we feel, the ways that we feel based on what we're able to create, I think, and I'm not speaking to motherhood here. I'm speaking to, what you're able to take in from the world and then bring back to the world in some way. So I think that we've become, as a society, overly committed to, or overly, focused on this word procreate as we apply it to women, when in fact, it's, the world runs based on what we're all able to create. I think in some ways, this idea of procreation, and I do have children, and I think that in some ways, this idea of procreation has been put on us as like, that's your role. Your role is to procreate, and your role is to procreate and to be very traditional in the way you do it. And we'll go off and create, we'll create stuff, and you just,
we'll create the world.
Yes. And then you be a vessel, do the thing, and caretake. Yeah. And I find that to be, personally very disempowering. Now, if there is a woman who chooses to have children and that's her choice, and she is in that role in the way that she chooses to do it, then that's great. But I think that we have to get to a point where we understand how we got to having this belief system that we have as a society about a woman's value and who owns her vagina and that lady part, and who has agency over those decisions, so that women can feel more comfortable to make whatever decision they choose to make, whether it be, motherhood, whether it be more non-traditional ways of, being a mother or not. But it has to start with us understanding that this is ours. This is our life. This is our decision to make, so that you can be happy with the decision that you come up with.
Yes, that's exactly it. It's empowering anybody and everybody to really be making the choices that they do with how they direct their life force energy. That's kind of how I see it. Creativity is like, I am imbued with this life.
Yes.
How am I directing my life in the world to create, whether it's human beings, experiences, creative projects, whatever it is? What am I putting into the world and contributing to the world with my life force energy?
Because that's the important thing. Exactly.
And something I've heard from many women with kids, many mothers who've read the book, is, wow, now I'm questioning, did I choose this? Did I really want to have kids, or did I just do it because I didn't think I had the choice not to, And that's been really interesting for these women to kind of contemplate as well. But yes, imagine a world where every child who was born was consciously chosen and brought forth from that energy of, this is how I'm choosing to direct my life force, you know? Not saying that anybody who has children, because it's just what we do, doesn't love their children or can't be a fantastic parent. But I just think the more consciousness we can bring to this decision in particular, given that it's literally one of only, I think, 2 decisions that we can make with our lives that's irreversible. Mm-hmm. The other decision being to end our own life.
Right. Right.
If we really want to get down to brass tacks, to either create life or to end life, these are the only decisions that are irreversible.
That are irreversible, for sure.
You know, it's like to not bring consciousness to a decision of that magnitude just seems, I don't know, I think we've evolved beyond that in terms of our evolution as a species. I hope we're evolving beyond that.
Yeah. When will we? Yeah. I don't know that we have. And no. I've used those words, directing your life force energy. I've used those words because I think that's what we come in. That's what we come into this earth with, like in that moment in time, if we're going back to astrology, right? Like on September 3rd for me, right? In the year I was born in Brooklyn, there was this moment in time where Lisanne Basquiat entered the collective, right? And then I am made of energy. I am life force energy. And then my life is this path of a bunch of decisions that I make from day to day to day about how I'm going to direct my life force energy. And there are some people who choose to direct their life force energy into doing the things that are laid out for them, and there's no judgment, and that's great. And there are some people who choose to direct their life force energy differently. And I think that once we understand that so much of what's happening in the world and in our day-to-day lives is deeper than the ways that it seems. It's not about this group of people, this gender that is like defining the world for us. Like, we each have our unique life force energy. What are you going to do with it? What are you planning to do with that? And then how are we going to relate to each other with respect and with honor for the decisions that others choose to make? I think it's an important thing to consider, and to imagine, because what if?
What if? I think it's a vital thing to consider.
Absolutely.
And then within that, some people are going to just be more comfortable or find it more appealing to, travel the path that is well traveled, and to go the more traditional route. And that's absolutely great. Not everybody has the stomach for a life of unbridled freedom in a way, because it does come with like
choices
make life more complicated. The more choices, the more complicated.
That's right.
It can take a lot of energy and self-conviction and deep inner searching to kind of really ask those questions. How am I going to bring my life force forward in the world in the way that's meaningful and impactful and fulfilling for me? Some people might not have the stomach for that or the desire for that, and that's absolutely fine too, but yeah, I do think these are questions that more and more people are asking, you know, which is reflected in the fact that the birth rate is dropping, because for so long having children has been presented as the ultimate path to fulfillment. Like, whatever else you might do with your life, if you don't do this one thing, you will die empty and unfulfilled. And I think that people are questioning that, actually.
And the ultimate path to being good, to having a good life, a good life is where you do the things, and then you get married and you stay with that person and you have the children, and and I think that has been laid out as the path to success. And it can be challenging when you're a person who maybe doesn't have that same traditional path. I mean, I'll speak, for myself, having I stepped into adulthood feeling like I had done it wrong already because I didn't have two parents in the home. It was already different. So I think that it's important for people for all of us to understand and recognize that the world really is changing, and, things are shifting, and there's some discomfort in shifting, because creation is also about the labor of pushing things through and coming up with an idea and having the idea be kind of all over the place and not knowing, there's some uncertainty to creating anything. And I think we're in the middle of that. And the pandemic kind of was another piece of that for all of us.
Absolutely.
But I think we're on our way to some place that's a little better and a little more interesting. I think
hope so.
than we were trying to kind of lay this thing out, this world
Exactly.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope so. I mean, it's making me think like creation is basically giving order to chaos. Like creation comes out of chaos oftentimes, chaos of sort of just nothingness or nothing coherent, like creation. And I'm thinking about getting a project that arrives in my brain and then organizing it into this 70,000 word manuscript that makes sense and says everything that it needs to say in the order that it needs to say it. That's a painful process, very taxing. And yes, so we need to be, I think, supporting each other in our creations, whatever shape, form they may take, is a part of this as well,
And I think as women, because of the reasons that we just talked about, I think it's also important for us, very important and critical almost, for us to accept each other, to accept each other's choices, and to validate each other, and to not be part of a devaluing another woman.
Yeah.
For whatever her choices are. And, I think you said it so beautifully in the beginning of this conversation, about, weight, color, choices, career, whatever these things are. I think it's really important that we validate each other. I know I have, when I think about the friends of mine who don't have children, and sometimes I, will be in a conversation and they'll always start with, I don't have children, but, and it's like, you don't have children and speak your piece,
and
right?
You have something to say. Yeah.
And you have something to say. And I think that a lot of times we as women have been pushed into this kind of corner of permission seeking and, this kind of hierarchical, if you're a woman with children, if you're a woman with children who has stayed married for 35 years, you are golden. You are the golden woman.
Yes.
Yes. And if you are a woman who has had children, but maybe is divorced, you are maybe not so much so. And if you're a woman who hasn't had children, there's like all these different ways that we can either reject each other or ways that we can connect more deeply with each other and really understand each other, because that, I believe, is the beauty of being a woman.
And that is belonging. That's what creates belonging. Going back to that need, that core human need to belong, which is what keeps us from pursuing our freedom sometimes. What really creates belonging is really taking the time to actually understand one another and know one another, And we live in societies where we're sort of like, we've been scattered so far and wide from our families and cultures of origin a lot of the time, There's a lot to learn from one another and about how to be together, And I think we're in that process too. And I think this is a part of that process and that conversation.
Absolutely. I have loved this conversation, Ruby. I could sit and chat with you for hours, me with a glass of wine, you with whatever your beverage of
My
choice.
de-alcoholized wine.
Your de-alcoholized wine. I have a couple of quick questions for you. One is, so your book is coming out in the United States on the 28th of March, Women Without Kids. And I know there's a second part to that, the title of that book. Would you share it with us?
The Revolutionary Rise of an Unsung Sisterhood.
Love it. And then it's launching in or being released in the UK on the 13th of April as well. Yeah. So buy her book. And this woman has a lot of wonderful things to say. You also wrote Sober Curious.
Yes, Sober Curious. I won't read the subtitle for that because it's extremely long.
Okay.
But ultimately, it's giving people permission to question their relationship with alcohol, regardless of whether they think they have a problem with alcohol, regardless of whether they identify with the label of alcoholic. This is saying, actually, this is something else we all kind of do, which we don't really question, which can have quite negative impacts. It's okay to question it, And then I wrote a follow-up called The Sober Curious Reset, which guides people through 100 days of not drinking if they're ready to create a really sustainable shift in their drinking habits.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Excellent. And then you are a book doula.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that. In my role
as a book doula, I help people concept, gestate, and birth their books. Meaning, people will come to me with I have an idea for a book. It's maybe this, I don't know, it's this. So I can help them. Well, what is the book? How will it be presented? What's the actual core idea? How will it be structured? From there, I often introduce people to agents, and then we might work on a book proposal to be pitched to publishers. From there, if they get the book deal, they might hire me to help them work on their whole manuscript in a sort of editing capacity. So that's my book doula work, and I absolutely love it. It's kind of a cliche to talk about books being babies, and I don't even really know if I like that, because I think, if a book project gets abandoned halfway through, like, oh well, it's not quite the same thing.
Yeah.
as a child. Yeah. But yeah, the creation and the birthing process of a book is labor intensive. And I love being there to be people's cheerleader, mentor, support, guide, doula through that process.
I love what you're doing with your life force energy, Ruby. I really appreciate it very much. And I am so excited for people to listen to this episode, because it's a conversation, the conversation about women without kids, and the conversation about how to navigate feelings of being the other, and how to navigate the relationship that women have with each other and with ourselves is so important. So I'm really happy that we were able to create space and a conversation, and a conversation around these very important topics. And I really appreciate you coming by to chat with me today. And I look forward to hearing more about what you're up to and about this beautiful book that's coming out. And thank you. Thank you so much for coming by.
Thanks for having me. This was a great conversation.
It was. I've enjoyed it. On this episode, we explored the question of how redefining sobriety and redefining motherhood can help us find freedom in our choices. My conversation with Ruby Warrington provided 3 key takeaways. First, we discussed the importance of exploring sobriety as a tool for personal growth. Ruby shared how sobriety allowed her to tune into her intuition and to connect more deeply with herself. Second, we talked about the need to redefine motherhood and find freedom in our choices. Ruby challenged the societal expectations placed on mothers and encouraged us to create our own definitions of motherhood. Lastly, we discussed the power of spirituality in our journey towards freedom. Ruby shared how she found spirituality as a means of connecting with something greater than herself, and how it has been a transformative experience in her own life. Be sure to pick up her recently published book, Women Without Kids. I really hope that this episode has provided you with insights and inspiration to explore these themes in your own life. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Shaping Freedom with Lisanne Basquiat podcast, where we bring you thought-provoking conversations on creating and living a life of freedom. Be sure to also rate and review this podcast. It would really mean the world to me. Until next time.